Hey everyone, I'm your host Brett, and welcome to another episode of Wallet Wisdom, a podcast presented by LMCU. On today's podcast, I'm joined by Patty Corkery, President and CEO of the Michigan Credit Union League and CUSG. With over 25 years of experience in the credit union industry, Patty is a collaborative leader and lifelong learner, two of my favorite things. But before we jump in, if you're new to the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So with that, let's dive in. Patty, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Patty Corkery is the president and CEO of Michigan Credit Union League, and her position includes educating the community, lawmakers, and the industry on the credit union difference and promoting the financial strength of credit unions in both Michigan and the nation. Patty, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, for our listeners to be able to understand a little bit more about what makes credit unions and banks a little bit different and how, as a credit union, there are some abilities that we really strive to make sure that we are reaching in our communities and how we're helping to, really make our members' financial life that much better. So can you help us kind of share a little bit of the kind of that main purpose of a credit union and some of the differences, I guess, in banking?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's my favorite topic, so I'm happy to talk about it. I think one thing that's helpful for people to know or remember if you knew it at one point, but credit unions actually started to form around the Great Depression. So, and the reason why credit unions were needed is because traditional banks were not lending. They weren't providing credit to people that didn't have a lot of collateral, a lot of assets. So credit unions really began because people needed loans. So you saw credit unions forming at factories, at schools, at certain jobs, and because those people just kind of collectively pooled their money together and made loans. I mean, literally, some of them started in a basement, right, or at a school or at a church even, and so it became this movement of these collaborative ways that people came together for lending and for finances. And it was because they couldn't get it anywhere else. And so that was how we started. And really that continues to be the mission today, even though things have changed since then. Typically credit unions, when compared to banks, are more likely to say yes because they're called upon to support their communities and work with people that are in their communities, whether those are wealthy communities or low income communities. They're there to serve their members. And that word is really important. And you said it already, Brett, is member. So when
Yes.
you belong to a credit union and when you join a credit union, you become a member owner. So you're not a customer. You're an owner because credit unions are not for profit cooperatives. And so every member has a share. Every member can vote for the board. People can come to the annual meeting. You are a member owner. And so that's the significant foundational difference between a credit union and a bank. At a bank, they're for-profit entities. They are there to make money. They typically have a very well-paid board of directors, and they make decisions with that lens of going for profit. Credit unions make decisions to support their community. And while they do make money each year, they take those profits and put them back into the community, into their members. And typically that's done, Brett, by lower fees, lower interest rates, and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you're helping to kind of paint that picture for our listeners, especially for those that have been listening for a while.
Yeah.
There are some episodes that we've had that, we touch on some of these aspects. And when we talk about lower rates and being able to save more and pay less on different things, it's that way of being able to take those funds and redisperse that into these different kind of initiatives, whether it's a lower rate or how we can help you on those lending side of things. And I love how you mentioned, those grassroots efforts in the early years of credit unions. I know we've mentioned a little bit. We had our 90th birthday celebration not that long ago here
Right.
at LMCU, and we had an episode talking about that and a little bit of the history of who we are. And to know that, we had those humble roots of being in a bunch of teachers in our
Yeah,
area here in Grand Rapids saying, we got to do something different. We got to help out our fellow teachers in our community, and to start in, the basement of a house and really see that effort. And then to look at, what almost 100 years later looks like, what a legacy. And I think there's so many great credit unions out there that have similar stories, like you said. Um,
absolutely.
so so now, as we kind of think about the credit union comparison, if you will, and even like the tax exempt status that we were kind of talking about as far as a nonprofit, I know that just recently in our news, we did have, obviously, there's some conversation around whether or not the federal government was going to continue to give that tax exemption, and really rallying around that. We talked a little bit about that on our podcast earlier as well, of, don't tax my credit union initiatives that were happening around the nation as well. Can you share a little bit about, what that looks like, and why, again, that tax exemption is such a valuable, it's so valuable for us?
Yeah, Brett, I'm glad you asked that. And shout out to LMCU because when we were actually in the halls of Congress talking about this issue, your CEO, Julie, was there along with some other members of your fabulous team to help us explain the credit union difference to members of Congress and explain why it is important to keep that tax exempt status intact. So I think first, I think a lot of people too, they might think, well, why do credit unions get away with not paying taxes? Why shouldn't we all pay taxes? Why should a credit union not pay taxes? So I think it's important to note that the exemption of tax that we're talking about is federal income tax. So credit unions are not required to pay tax on federal income. So that means by not having to pay that tax, they're able to reinvest that income or profit, if you will, back into their communities. But credit unions like LMCU do pay taxes. They pay payroll taxes, real estate taxes, property taxes, and sales tax. So
Yeah.
there are taxes that are being paid. In fact, credit unions account for over $36 billion in local, state, and federal taxes annually.
Wow.
So the tax we're talking about is a very specific one, and it's on federal income taxes. And your CEO did a great job talking to our to Congress about what LMCU does with that money. Instead of having to pay that federal income tax, it's millions of dollars that's reinvested into the community. So you think about some of the great things that LMCU is doing, building branches, opening branches where banks have left, right?
Yeah.
Creating these banking deserts. You guys are doing that. You're doing all of the amazing financial education and resources that you're doing. And one thing that I love that you all are focused on is your first time buyer program for people that are trying to buy a house. You're
Yes.
able to
Yes.
offer all of this support for those down payments because you have, some reserve set aside to do that because you didn't have to write a check to the government. And so while some people might think it's not fair, there are a lot of taxes being paid, and we have so many concrete examples of what LMCU and our other credit unions are doing with that money that they don't have to send on. It's coming back to the members and to the communities.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that too. It's I think the common misconception is, oh, then all of your taxes you don't have to pay. No,
Right.
it's really just a one small area of tax that does have great impact in how we can continue to leverage those savings and bringing that back to our communities, which
Yeah.
again is kind of that win-win all the way around. And I love that you mentioned our first-time homebuyer programs. And I'll tell you, our team gets to do some pretty fun
Yeah.
video content creation. And we've had the privilege to now go to at least a couple dozen different closings to what we call crash their closing,
Oh, how
to
fun.
celebrate them and to welcome them as a member. And many of them are the first time home buyers who are going through those programs. And it's amazing to hear their stories, being able to just ask some follow-up questions while we're there, and just to learn how many times these individuals would go to banks, and their banks that they grew up with, and continue to be told no to. We can't lend to you, we can't get a mortgage that is in your credit score range, or whatever that looks like. Lots of just closed doors. And to hear some of the impact when people finally hear a yes for the first time after years, perhaps, of struggling to try and find a home. Um, it's really rewarding. It really is.
Yeah,
And it's quite
for
a
sure.
touching and moving experience. So, really neat.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about the average cost of a home in Michigan is $250,000. So, you're just getting out of college or just getting out of high school. Maybe you went through a trade school and you're just trying to make ends meet. I mean, it's so challenging for people
Yeah.
to buy a home. And the biggest thing is the down payment, right? Where, okay, well,
Right.
you want so much down, and when houses are that expensive, of course that means the down payment is really high. And so I think it's great that you all are doing that, and to see that firsthand like you just described must have been really, really cool.
It
Because
is.
that's
It's so
that's
fun.
obviously life changing for people to start to build equity in a home and have that type of asset. And a lot of credit unions do that not only with housing,
Mhm.
but in auto, the price
You're
of a
right.
car, as we know, is really, really expensive. And I'm sure you have programs likewise aligned with first time autos, or just those more reasonable interest rates and things like that when it comes to buying a car, which is also another hurdle for people who don't have a lot of built up wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, Patty, having now hosted this podcast for a few years now, I end up learning a lot myself in
Yeah.
being a part of the podcast. And case in point was we have an episode. It was a while back for listeners. Feel free to check it out and see if you can find that in our archives. But we talked about auto rates, and we had a member who came into the credit union with like a unbelievable like 21%
Oh man.
auto rate on their car loan. And I mean they're paying like a ton of money, taking two steps forward to take one step back, and it was just like it wasn't going anywhere. And so, long story short, they came into LMCU. We were able to refinance, and that I didn't even know. I didn't know you could refinance a car. I know you could
Yeah.
refinance a house, but when I heard
Hmm.
that, I thought, well, that's really interesting. And to know that we could help, we lowered that car interest rate down to like, I want to say it was like 2%, maybe 3% compared to the 21% that
Isn't
they
that
were just being
crazy?
gouged.
Yeah,
Unbelievable. But
that's
again,
crazy.
for those that are listening, that's that difference. I mean, that really does start to establish how the credit unions can be able to really help provide you with tools and honestly tangible things that you need. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And I think there's definitely, especially with younger people, I think we've been seeing it over the last several years. They're really careful about who they do business with. They're really,
yeah,
they really look into who they partner with, and they want to make sure that they're good corporate citizens, for example, or caring about the environment, or caring about the community, or whatever their passion is. And
yeah,
I think that's why we've seen this trend of people who, okay, well, I can get a car loan I can get it online from a place that doesn't even have, a physical location, or I can get it with a bank, or I can go to a credit union. You have a lot of options. And I think
yeah,
what I'm seeing, and I'm really excited about moving the needle for folks, is that when you look into what these institutions stand for and what they do for their communities, and whether or not they're just chasing profit and not really
mhm,
caring about people, I think you're going to see and continue to see more and more, especially young people, decide to bank at a credit union, because when you peel back the onion, you get to see all of the great work that's being done. And I love that this podcast is addressing some of these topics, because financial education is definitely something that's lacking for our younger people. And we hear a
yeah,
lot of them are going to TikTok or YouTube to really get insights on what
yeah,
investing means, or what interest rates mean and why it's important, what credit means and what a credit score is and how does it change, and all of these tools that are so important. And credit unions have really stepped up to help guide the way for people, to make smart decisions about their money.
yeah. Well, and kind of going back real quick to something you said a little bit earlier was, how a lot of banks, unfortunately, they have just because again, profit margins, right, have really abandoned a lot of locations
Yeah.
throughout the nation and especially some of these more rural areas. And, we look at LMCU and we continue to build branches. We continue to add branches in our communities, and I do believe that that's going to come back as a benefit, because I'm also seeing, Patty, in this the younger generation, where with everything at their fingertips as far as information and answers in a digital space, I think that there's still going to be this component of a real person. When I'm going to make a final decision, I
Yeah.
want to know that I have a real person, that it's not fake, that it's not digital fraud, that it's not this or that. But I know I have a resource that if I need a single source of truth, I can drive over to that branch and I can get in there, and they'll be able to answer my questions as well.
Yeah.
So kind of giving the whole kind of gambit, if you will, of options for our members and the community to engage with us,
Yeah.
whether digitally or in person.
I agree, because sometimes you think about it, it's like, well, when so many people are doing things online and credit unions have really stepped up in technology to make things very fast and easy to do online. I agree with you, Brett. There's times when you want to go in person. I mean, we've all done business
Yeah.
with an entity that is digital only. And trying to get somebody on the phone is impossible. They keep
Right.
rerouting you to an email. And imagine if
So
you're trying
true.
to get somebody on the phone when you're talking about something that you just pressed a button to take a loan out for $40,000 and something went
Right.
weird, or you're not really sure how to make a payment, or you have all these really really important things to decide, and there's literally no way to get somebody on a phone call. That is
Yeah.
very scary, especially when you're talking about, your first time, even if it's your third car or third home. These are very very crucial things to want to be able to reach out to somebody to have, and that's one of the reasons why we're continuing to see branches opening. I think some branches are getting a little smaller in terms of their footprint,
Yes.
because that just makes sense, and to me, environmentally, that's always a win.
Agreed.
But I agree with you. It's important to be in your car, drive down the street, and being able to see your branch. You might not go in it, but it's there. And if you
Yes.
have questions, or something happens, and there's all these scams, or you're not sure if a text you're getting is legit, or somebody's
Yeah.
asking you for your password, these are scary things that are happening to people every day. And to know that there's some place you can go in and just show them your phone and go, look, it this says it's whatever, help
Yeah,
me out with
right.
this. It's super important, because there's a lot of scary things happening in the digital space. And it's nice to know that there's actual humans that you can go talk to.
Absolutely. Well, I think about it this way. It's like your personal finances deserve a personal
Yeah,
touch,
exactly.
and that's part of the whole component of it. When we're talking about your personal finances, it shouldn't be generalized, because everyone has their own unique situations, and there's nuance in that. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And I think too, Brett, just to your point about, going back to the credit union and bank difference, and, sure, people are going to hear us and they're going to drive down the street and go, well, I'm seeing a Chase, or I'm seeing, B of A or whatever. Yes, they do still have branches, but they've closed thousands of branches while credit unions
Yeah.
continue to open them. And what's key is these rural areas that we're talking about. Some rural areas, when a bank closes a branch because it's not profitable, the only institution, and I'm using air quotes, is a payday lender, right? That's like the only option for
Mm,
folks. So we're seeing
wow.
more and more in Michigan and outside of Michigan, credit unions doubling down on making sure there's access for everybody in the community, even if, it's a lower income community. They actually have a
Yeah.
mission to serve the lower income folks. And that should be important to all of us.
Absolutely. Where a company's priorities are put, I think, are the same, kind of gets to what you were saying about the younger generation. And honestly, I think we're starting to see it in a generation entirely of, I want to know that where I'm putting my money and what businesses I'm using on a day-to-day basis have the purpose and moral, or I guess moral beliefs, or the things that are important to my core beliefs. I really like that. Now, as we're kind of getting closer to wrapping up, there was one other quick question I wanted to ask you too, which was, I know that like for us, and I've seen it with Chase as well. There's always like little compliance at the bottom of
Yeah.
commercials or in mailers, and like for us, it's federally insured by the NCUA, and you see these things. It's federally insured by. So could you help us understand? What are deposits in like the deposits insured, and are they? I guess are deposits insured the same way? I guess that's how I should ask that, as far as a credit union and a bank.
Yeah, they definitely are. So, you think back, we talked about the depression and, when there were runs on the banks, for example, of people really worried if a bank is going to quote unquote fail. And we've seen some of that happening in the banking
We
space a
did a
few
couple
years
years
ago.
ago.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and people are worried about their savings, about their money, obviously. So yes, banks and credit unions are both insured. So it's just a different entity that does the insurance. So with credit union, you're going to see NCUA, and with a bank, it's going to be FDIC, and you all are required to disclose that. So there's various limits up to a certain amount that assets are insured, and if you get to that limit, I'm sure your institution reaches out to you to help you with that. But for sure, your money is just as safe at a credit union as it is at a bank, and it really just comes down to who's actually regulating the institution and who's providing that insurance or guarantee on funds. So definitely the same, just different entities.
For sure. So you've been in the credit union industry for quite some time, and if I remember, or if I put down here, 25 years plus in
Yeah.
the credit union kind of industry.
Yep.
I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about what you've seen over the career, and how credit unions are continuing to grow, and just maybe some of the ways that you've seen that growth over the last few years, or decade or so.
Absolutely. Well, credit unions definitely continue to grow here in Michigan. 60% of Michiganders belong to a credit union. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And nationally, it hovers around 37%. So yay, Michigan. Our communities love their credit unions. So there's still room to grow there and get more members. So if you're listening and you're not a member, you definitely want to run over to LMCU. But um, what I've seen, credit unions sometimes get a bad reputation that they're not as technically savvy as a bank. And credit unions have blown that myth out of the water. I've witnessed over time the technology advances, and we talked about some of them with all the things you can do online. We talked a lot about branches, but credit unions, most of them have a phenomenal online digital space, whether it be your mobile app or going online to do things. And so that evolution has really been key. And I think with the thought process of making sure that you're serving your communities, they listen to what their communities need. So if they have a lot of small businesses in their community, credit unions are stepping up and supporting small businesses in their area, just like they are individuals. We talk a lot about data and cybersecurity. We mentioned that earlier. I see firsthand how credit unions are concerned about their members, wanting to make sure that they have top-notch data security in place for their members to protect their members. And I'm sure you all are pummeling your members with information, not to give out
Yeah.
passwords, not to click on links. I mean, we're
Yeah.
continuously, because these folks that are trying to scam people are getting smarter and smarter. So credit unions have really kept up with that. And if unfortunately it happens to you, like we talked about earlier, there's a branch to go in, or at least somebody to get on the phone or chat with online that can support. So credit unions have moved a lot throughout that space, and in supporting their communities. So whether it be through financial education that continues to evolve and get better over time, to the digital channels, and then looking into, there's a lot of talk about stablecoin these days. There's a lot of talk about blockchain and things like that. I see firsthand how credit unions are looking into this. They're looking
Yeah.
into how they need to evolve as our money evolves, how we pay things evolves. Let's face it, none of us really carry cash anymore, and people want
Yeah.
payments to be instantaneous and happen right away in a secure environment. And credit unions invest millions into that space to make sure that their members can easily, quickly, and safely pay for things. And so So it's been really exciting to be along for that ride as technology evolves and credit unions
Yeah.
continue to evolve to make sure that they're competitive in the banking space and can provide that same level of security and technology that all financial institutions are striving for, really.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you mentioned that about how the digital age has really kind of continued and credit
Yeah,
unions have adopted those things. I look at our mobile app. I've been a longtime member at LMCU, even when I was younger, in college. And, just back in like the early 2000s, the internet was still kind of getting its sea legs, if you will. And, that time, you look at it from then even to now, 10, 12, 15 years, you realize, man, how the mobile app has changed, what functionalities you can do, check captures and, transferring funds and bill pays. And it's incredible. And again, that doesn't mean as a credit union that those tools don't exist.
right.
So I love that. I love that.
Yeah, and I've seen it
So
firsthand how good you guys are at it because I didn't mention Brett, but I am a member of LMCU. I'm a member of a few credit unions, but you guys have my mortgage, so I know how great your team is
wonderful.
firsthand. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
hmm
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that is one of the things that I feel sets us apart in a lot of spaces. And I know there's so many amazing credit unions doing great things. And maybe I'm just
Yes.
biased, but we've got a great team here. And it's one of those things, and I've shared this on the podcast to listeners before, but I can be a little bit skeptical like everybody else. There's a lot of ads and marketing out there that
Sure.
you're not sure, is it just lip service or not, kind of thing, right? And so for me, when I hear that, and I hear people say, well, LMCU really cares about making sure we're putting more money back into our members' pockets, right?
Right.
Or we're always thinking about member first. You hear that maybe on the outside and you're like, yeah, really though? I mean, to be able to sit in meetings and to be able to
Mhm.
have the ability to have captured video and content with our CEO, our heads of marketing, head of mortgage, all of the main heads of our departments, to hear them always somehow bring that back to how are we helping our members,
Right.
it feels authentic, and
hmm
that there's authenticity there. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And your members are your owners. So I
They
think credit
are.
unions just are going to approach them differently and you're there to serve them. It's not a discussion that might happen in other for-profit rooms where it's just how can we make more money for
Mhm.
how can we make more profit and profit share with our board of directors or things like that. Those aren't the conversations that are happening. And I agree. It's like we say all these things and people are always like, well, are they being 100% accurate? But I've been in those rooms too, Brett, where we have thought leaders from our credit unions around the state doing the same exact thing that you all are doing
Yeah.
at LMCU. And that is really just how can we be better? How can we do more for our
Right.
communities? How can we make sure we're touching people of that speak different languages that
That's right.
might not have traditional jobs and we're missing out on certain pockets because we need to adapt the way we, talk about things that, some people might not understand. And it's a constant dialogue of people just really trying to reach everybody in the community and offer products that, the first thing you're asking isn't how much are we going to make as a credit union on this product? No, it's
Right.
how is this going to serve a member and is this something that they need? So I agree. And it's always awesome to be part of those conversations because you see firsthand what's important.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Well, Patty, again, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and giving some insights. Again, your leadership is just absolutely incredible, and we haven't even been able to touch on a lot of the other things that you're involved in, and all the amazing committees and boards, and you lead the women's leadership component too. So there's so much. If you're listening and you want to learn more about Patty and all the amazing things that she's doing and helping with that movement and also in leadership, be sure to check out her social channels as well. You can find her on LinkedIn. And again, Patty, thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate your time. We'll have to have you on again.
Yeah, part two. Well, thanks, Brett, for having me. I love that you're providing all of this education to your community, and love everything you guys are doing at LMCU, and excited to continue to watch you guys evolve and grow even more.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.